grazing program. There's a lot of conversations about grazing and the ways that should or shouldn't be done, but what is it when we talk about adaptive grazing? What does that really mean, and what's that about? So that'll be the conversation, and hopefully you'll have lots of questions. But anyway, back to who I am. I'm first and foremost a farmer. That's how I think of myself, and have farmed for many years, a long time in the States, 24 years in America, and then came back to New Zealand because I thought New Zealand was the country where people really, really knew how to graze. And I discovered that I'd learnt a lot in America, and we were still stuck in a paradigm of eat it all and come back next week as quickly as you can. So I think what I've found over the years is that there's many ways to do all of what we do, and there's no right way or wrong way, and it's always context specific. So that's some of what we want to explore today, and hopefully get from you some of those questions that come up in those different contexts of how do I think about this, or what do I do? So the other things that some of you may know about me, I worked with Nicole Masters in Integrity Soils for quite some years, still do little bits and pieces in that arena, and also spent quite a few years setting up Mungaroa Farms in Upper Hutt, just out of Wellington. So that's enough about me, and I'll pass you over.
Welcome all here today. It's a privilege to be sitting up here in front of you. Like it's, so it's great to be here and see everyone here. So I'm Russell Hield, part of Hield Farm. So we run an organic regenerative dairy farm on the east coast of the North Island in a place called Norsewood, where you'll always find the best socks in the world. And yeah, we've been on this journey for about 9 or 10 years now. It's been a pretty amazing journey. Certainly learnt a lot on our pathway, trialling new things and just giving everything a go. And I feel pretty privileged that we are able to do that, and we have that ability to look after and be good custodians of the land that we are on. So yeah, looking forward to the chat today. It's I think the grazing management side of things in farms is probably one of the biggest opportunities we have in farming. It's one of those things I see is that can have the biggest impact on our soils, our water cycles, our plants, our animals, our people, and the whole environment that we have on our farms. So yeah, looking forward to diving into it today.
Sweet. Kia ora run. My name is Kurt Portas. I originated from a small place called Takapo, right next to Norsewood here. I was actually fortunate to put some of our wool from the farm and create the best socks in the world at the Norsewear factory, so that's my little claim to fame there. But so originally from Takapo, I went to a training cadet farm called Smedley Station, went down south, wanted to go on the biggest stations you could find, mustered the biggest blocks, and ended up in Gore for a few years, and then thought I had a bit of a gift at running staff and managing people. Talking to Darren before, and that's probably the most crucial thing is the people in the organisation and trying to empower them. And so I was like, let's get into management, and ended up running a farm called Palliser Ridge, and run that farm for about 17 years, and got onto the regen journey. Did the the whole using a whole lot of superphosphate, and then weaned myself off it for about 10 years, and saw no drop in production, and actually a little bit of a lift and healthier animals and all that sort of stuff. So did that for 17 years, and then now I've just finished in June. Ended up having a bit of an equity partnership in that farm, and just finished, and now sort of like a retired farm manager, and now going out and doing my own thing. Call my company Curtains Land Management, and now I sort of help coach farmers in that space, regen, and mentoring, and also work for a company called Regenerative, certifying farms around New Zealand. Just recently, I had get into the grazing question. I just had Jim Elizondo over in New Zealand. We got him over. We've had him over twice now. We ran 3 courses in October, one up in Hawke's Bay, and then a couple down the South Island here. And I use him sort of like as a mentor now, and I find it quite inspiring of some of the systems that he's using. So I think it's about me.
Awesome.
And just going back to grazing management, grazing management is the key to regenerative agriculture. That's how it's such an important topic.
All right, thank you both. I just want to show of hands, how many of you in here are grazing livestock and feel like you're doing some sort of adaptive grazing at this time? Good lot of you. Thank you. That's good to know. So I think the first question I'm going to pose to these guys is, when somebody says to you, what is adaptive grazing? What is it that you say? We'll start with you, Kurt.
I thought you had enough of me already. I think adaptive grazing to me is having a plan of how you're going to, your plan and your vision of how you're trying to farm. And so if you don't have a plan, then how can you sort of be adaptive to what's happening? And so how are you gonna create as much feed as you can through the spring? How are you gonna get through the summer and the winter to be able to eat that next spring and carry as much stock as you can? And having a grazing plan is the key, and a vision of what you're trying to achieve. That vision's you're not gonna be able to do exactly what I want to do a day shift, but then it comes to the weekend and you're going to be away for the week, and then, or it's a stormy weather, and then so you've got to adapt to that week or that time. But I think it's just having that vision of what you're trying to achieve is what I.
So how is that different from people just doing rotational grazing and what we've been doing all along? How's that different?
Well, it could be that, their plan could be we're doing a rotation of 40 days and we're just going to keep going around, but then we're going to go and buy in, when it gets dry, we're going to just buy in and supplement. That could be part of their plan. And then same thing with winter. But it's probably just more deeper thinking of how you're going to work with nature to get through the seasons and to produce as much product as you can.
Okay, I'm going to give you a go, Russell.
Cool. Adaptive grazing to me is about creating resilience in our systems, getting to the point where we can be able to push feed ahead of us and not always rely on the truck coming in the gate or having to go and cut and carry everything. And also the adaptive part is to be able to, if, like Kurt was saying, if you have a stormy week, that you've got that flexibility, you've got that resilience in your system, you've got feed ahead of you, so you've got options. It's about creating options for yourself, and that's something that we've really thought about a lot on our farm. Is just how we plan for that, and so we now can hold a lot of feed ahead of us, and works really well. It just for me, it's just creating resilience in our system. And it's the resilience in terms of growing the feed, feeding the soil, increasing water infiltration, really feeding our animals well, and pushing a lot of that feed back down to feed our underground network as well, because that's a massive part of our system.
Great, thank you. I think I'll just add to that. When I lived in the States during the 90s, I did the holistic resource management training with the Savory group and through Washington State University. And I think the thing that I find useful in that is we often don't think in whole system thinking. And New Zealand farmers got really, really good at utilising pasture through their animals. We can measure our pasture. We know how much dry matter we've got. We know what the intake should be on those animals to get the production we want, whether it's a growth rate per kg per animal or whether it's milk production. We're really good at that. But what we forgot to consider was the plant and the need of the soil microbiome that is the gut of the plant. So when it comes to adaptive grazing, the thing that I think gets really tricky for people, you're not just managing how much feed you've got and how much feed your animal needs and how much residue you need to come back in 15 days or 30 days or whatever. You're actually now having to think about, if you imagine you've got a table and you've got 6 kids at the table. You've not got one, you've got 6. And every one of those children has a different set of requirements. So you've got your plant family, you've got your soil microbiology, that family, you've got your animal family, you've got your staff family, you've got all these different components that you're now having to think more deeply about, because every decision you make in one arena will have a big impact, both short-term and long-term, in those other arenas. Now that gets complex. And when it gets complex, as human beings, what we naturally do is look for the next recipe. And this is where I think it gets really interesting with what we call adaptive grazing, because there's a lot of systems out there. There's take 50%, leave 50%. There's take a third, leave a third, trample a third. There's total grazing with Jim. There's a lot of different approaches. So I'm curious from you guys, how do you navigate all of that when it comes to walking out the gate and into the paddock and it's either rained or not rained and now you've got to make some decisions? How are you dealing with that?
That's a really great point. So the way we look at our grazing system, we don't have a necessarily always a set rotation. So it changes on a weekly basis it changes. So, and also throughout the seasons it changes as well. So through that springtime, we'll get down to about a 30 to 35 day rotation, and then as our growth rates start increasing, then we'll start taking areas out. And so how I look at our system, we operate our rotation, and then we have paddocks that we put out, say, on a delayed rotation, and then we have paddocks that we put out on a deferred rotation. So our delayed rotation basically is around 45 to 70 days. And by pushing that feed ahead of us, it's how we build resilience in our system. And then so we can come to a cold week and be able to bring those paddocks back in if we need to. And we've been able to hold feed ahead of us and still be able to put our cows in there and know that we can get good production from those cows without going and harvesting and then 2 weeks later having to feed it out, which is what I see a lot around the countryside. So it's just adapting. Every week we look at our system and look, where are our opportunities this week? Like, do we have the opportunity to maybe cut and stack and put some feed away? Do we have an option of pushing more feed ahead of us and deferring it and letting it go longer? So we're always thinking every week, where's our opportunity at? And looking at how we can then manage the feed that we do have. So yeah, it's just creating that resilience, pushing that feed ahead of us, and just it's the cheapest and most cost-effective way of feeding our animals is holding pasture in our paddocks.
Yeah, I think Russell nailed it there. I was the same. You would have sort of our set rotation. I think I had a few staff to sort of deal with, and so it sort of had to be quite rigid of what, this is the rotation. Talking about a big hill block, and then they're going to do 3 days in here, 3 days in there, and then go there. And so it was pretty structured. But then if we got the opportunity, like I said, the good spring, boom, that's when we would try and skip that area or that paddock if it didn't muck our rotation up for the next round. But skip it make sure all the other pastures that the animals are going onto is green and growing, fresh feed, and then just letting some areas go and defer those for the spring. Jim Elizondo talks about those deferred paddocks. That's how you store long-term soil carbon through root exudate. So it's got to be a good thing of deferring that paddock longer than 6 months, coming back into it for the winter. A big thing about big thing for sheep and beef. I was mainly sheep and beef, but also run a dairy farm as well. And the big thing for sheep and beef is like feeding hay costs 50 cents a kg of dry matter to feed a bale of hay out, and you're only making 20 cents. So every bale, every kg of dry matter you're feeding out, you're losing 30 cents. And so it's just crazy to making hay and then feeding it out to dry stock. Dairy is a little bit different because you probably make 50 cents, 60 cents a kg of dry matter, and it's so you're sort of treating water. You're not making much money and you're getting out of a hole, but at least you're not losing money. So if we can, as farmers, defer graze paddocks in the springtime and come back 6 months later and then really graze them again without making hay is good for the soil, good for the microbes, good for the staff not having to feed out hay and stuff. But hopefully I answer that question right.
I think what comes up for me and probably comes up for some of you is, hey, what about quality? Because we all got really well trained, and we got trained that, especially in the sheep and beef industry, that you need that lovely short, high metabolizable energy feed of a good 12 or whatever you can get out of it, 11, 12. And we all know that's that lovely short grass, and you still drive around New Zealand, and I spent many years driving around going, that looks good. And now I drive around and go, oh my goodness, we are stripping our land down to bare nothing. So I'm kind of curious for both of you, and for some of you out there probably dealing with this, how do you shift your view of what you're looking at such that you start seeing the landscape newly, and what you see? What I once saw is a good-looking farm was one that was grazed to the boards and had a nice green cover on it and all the rest of it. And I think a lot of us have to go through that transition. I'm curious, how have you're a lot younger. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, so we skunked it. We had really high stocking rates. But how have you dealt with your own internal sort of doubts and questionings when it comes to making those changes?
It's a really great point, and it's like we're trained to look at it, leave our paddocks like a lawn, and have that beautiful quality come away. But one thing we worked out earlier on is a lot of that causes a lot of stresses, because we're trying to push way too much protein into our animals, and at the end of the day, what we end up facing is a lack of fibre in our animals. So we end up lacking rumination. And what we found on our farm especially is once we started pushing our rotations out, especially probably before this, is we started putting a lot of diversity out in our pastures. So our pastures are 10, 11, 12 plus species, which gave us that ability to push longer rounds and hold more quality. So what we noticed is as soon as we started pushing rotation lengths out, we started noticing more plants coming away. And then what we noticed there is those plants held on in a more vegetative state for longer. So what we noticed is as soon as we have a dry period, our ryegrass just goes to seed. But what we notice is on the other side of it is all our clovers are coming through, our prairie grass, our timothy, our phalaris, our coxfords are all coming through and staying in a really vegetative state. So we're able to run a 45, 50-day rotation, milking off it, and still get really good production off it, because we've got that balance between our carbs and our protein. So they're still getting fibre in their system, but those plants are also building sugars as they're growing, as we let them go longer. And then those sugars are then flowing through into our animals' rumen and feeding those microbes to break down all that pasture.
Yeah, it is when you start getting diverse pastures and get cocksfoot coming through the sward and phalaris and it doesn't look pretty and it's longer and but to us now it looks looks awesome, looks magical. But yeah, uh, everyone else, yeah, they just want it nice and mown and pretty much as skinned as it can be to make it look like a golf course. But yeah, it is a different mindset. But when you see the results, when you're heading into summer and you've got feed in front of you because it's not all boarded, and you're not worrying about the drought because you've got covers to go onto, you're pretty easily convinced. I'm still a big fan of when we do graze is to make sure it's grazed down very low and even, so then all the plants are coming back and staying vegetative and growing, and trying not to have any dead stuff in the pasture, and we call that non-selective grazing versus selective grazing. There's a lot of, probably the biggest concerns I see around is selective grazing. Going through pastures and then just leaving bits and pieces, and then we're wondering why that your stock is not performing. And the next time you go around, it's because you've left all this too much dead matter there standing. So I think you're better to clean it up and save paddocks for 6 months versus sort of skipping through them. Yeah, I spent a whole lot of years. Do we skip through and then do we get that stuff later, or how do we do it? But now I sort of have a vision of I want it clean. But if I'm getting out of control, I want to set paddocks aside for drier times or in the winter.
So that sounds like you've got kind of a fairly set way of doing it. When do you, and what are the variables that show up that have you do it differently? Like, what are those variables that, is it the rain? Is it the fact that you're going away for the weekend? What are all those variables? Because they come into play, and then how do you manage your thinking and your decision making about, because you're not always going to deck it to the boards and then let it recover. There will be times you'll do different things. So what are the points that pop up that make you choose differently?
Oh, it happens all the time, But that's where I said it, when it gets back to the vision, your vision's to do this, but, you're not going to get it right every time, but that's where we want to head, So just thinking about the vision of that's what we're trying to do, but if it doesn't happen, don't worry, Don't stress about it. Let them go for a few days if you have to go away for the weekend, whatever it is. Give them a 3-day break. Yeah, and another one that probably triggers it is like you have younger stock, say lambs, that need to go through and pick stuff probably, and versus being really pushed to graze that harder. So they're going to be doing well, but then something is going to have to compromise and do a good job for you at some other stage. So you think you're winning by getting those lambs, pushing those lambs along, but then something else is going to be compromised. So yeah, there's no silver bullet. Yeah, one just a little bit of a story, just to spice people up. But we, I was like, how do we get around this? And I was like, let's just leave the lambs on mum the whole time. We're talking about 4,000 ewes. In mobs of say 600 or 800 ewes with their lambs, so it might have been 1,200 total sheep in each mob, and I kept all the ewes and lambs together right through the whole season. The ewe lambs got mated with their mothers, and then we didn't actually wean them off their mums until like August or July, and but the wethers, because we had wethers at the time, to keep it real simple, so it's just one mob, they're all together. And then the wethers we just siphoned off as they were ready, but kept the ewe lambs on, put the rams out, and just to try and, have those ewes eating that poorer quality, but then they had their lamb. And I wanted to minimise drenching, and because I hate drenching, and we didn't drench anything until about April, I think it was. So, yeah. The results were No production loss. Same scanning result, same lambing result, except I didn't have to drench as much, and it was reasonably simple. We just had one mob and just rotating, and I was like, man, why do we wean the lambs? Like, why don't we just leave them on their mum? Like, that's what, the milk's better than anything else, and if they're getting the right minerals from that, then they shouldn't, get a gut ache or whatever and then need drenching. So that was my theory.
Like coming up, like what Jules was just talking about there, is we've got to be really careful that we don't get caught in a prescriptive model. Because like she's saying, there's so many models out there, there's so many people like, this is how you need to do it, this is the only way. And this is what I love about like a holistic adaptive grazing plan, is that it's not prescriptive. We're not on a set 18 to 20 day rotation. We're not set on a 30-day rotation. We're not set on a 40-day rotation or a 50. We're adaptive. We're making changes all the time. Like, sure, we have a plan to like grow and harvest as much pasture as we can, but it's just adapting all the time. Like every week, where are our opportunities? What's the weather doing? What stage are our cows at? And also just assessing pastures as well. Like what we've found at home, like if we've got a paddock underperforming, is we'll leave that paddock out, we'll defer it, we'll give it 120, 150 day rest, and then bring that back in, and then that paddock ends up being back to the top of our list. It comes back as one of our best performing paddocks in that following season. And so one thing we've found is time is our biggest healer. Basically almost getting away from those prescriptive models, and just, being adaptive with what you do, how you do. Like one thing we do is like when our covers get high, we increase our density. So we just cut the cow's brakes back. So even back in the late springtime, where normally we'd be grazing 3.5 hectares a day, we were down to grazing 2 hectares a day. And we just took a heap of paddocks out and delayed them and deferred them. And then those paddocks then came back in later on. We were able to harvest some of them. We were able to leave some deferred. And then we went through a bit of a dry patch, so we just brought the deferred paddocks back in. And then as it rained, we stayed on our deferred paddocks and mixed them in with some of our other paddocks that had a really good fresh growth, but there was not a lot of nutrient density in there and not a lot of fibre, but we were able to mix it in with some of our deferred paddocks. And then now we've built up our covers again. We've taken other paddocks out for deferred, and we've taken other paddocks out for delayed grazing, and then we'll just see how the autumn goes to whether they come back in or whether they stay out. So this is what I love about the adaptive grazing systems, is that you do what works for you. And like I always say, every farm and every farmer is different, and just understanding your context. So it's,
Can I just add something in there? I was just having a thought there, but the biggest...
God help us.
But the biggest thing I see for farmers, and especially in the sheep industry, is just getting those sheep moving. If you can do anything, it's just getting, after docking time, is getting letting that pasture rest so that plant's able to express itself. So then it can, you'll end up growing more grass. You'll be more resilient come summertime. That's probably the biggest shift I can see in the sheep industry, is get those sheep moving after docking time.
I think the other thing you just said there, Kurt, is let a plant express itself. And it's kind of like having a child and you don't let it grow up. And that's what we do when we keep regrazing our plants before they've had time to recover. And we're caught in the mindset of that's good quality feed. It's got high metabolizable energy. That's what an animal wants. But what we keep feeding our animals is forages that are too high in protein. They get a shitty back end. We assume it's worms. We drench them, and now we've got drench resistance. So, we're on a hiding to nowhere, and it takes a bit of courage to start doing things differently. And don't underestimate that will challenge you. For those of you who haven't done it, it will challenge you. It'll challenge you because you worry about what the neighbours think, you worry about what your partners and your kids think and everybody else. But I think it does, you know, even if you're just trying a paddock over the back of the farm and going, I'm going to try it a bit differently, no one's going to see what I'm going to do, but I'm going to start learning and understanding what is the physiology of a plant and at what stage should I be grazing it, and what's that going to then produce underground with regards to cycling of nutrients and health, therefore, that gets transferred to our animals. So just to add that in there, I think, you know, there's people in here that are already doing this, there's people in here that are not. What are the pitfalls? What are the things you'd say to somebody who's out there going, yeah, I want to try this, but I'm not sure where to start? What are you going to tell them?
Just give it a go. Like, and also go and see people that are doing it. Like Jules said, there's lots of people in this room that are doing these sort of practices. They may not be out there with their hands up telling everyone about it, but there are people. So just get amongst your community, talk to fellow farmers, see what they're doing, see what's working for them, and then just get curious, start asking questions, and just back yourselves. Give yourselves that ability to just have a go, like try something new. And it, like Jules was saying, it doesn't have to be your whole farm. It can be one paddock that you try it on.
Yeah, I agree. Other farmers are the key. Learning off other farmers, seeing what's, you know, seeing a farmer that's been as successful, holding a high stocking rate through low input, good production. You know, pick their brains, learn from them, use them as a mentor. You know, they're the key people to respect and to learn from. They can understand everything that you'll be going through, and yeah, they're definitely the people to learn from.
And I think more than anything, we're all learning. None of us know the answer in your context, with your situation, your weather, your landscape, your wants and needs financially. None of us have the answer. You do, and it does take, you know, a little bit of courage to go, I'm going to try something. And like a child who learns to walk, you'll fall down, and those will be your best opportunities to learn and to grow your knowledge and understanding of the system you're dealing with. So, yeah, don't be afraid, and take the risk that you can afford to lose the game at. Don't bet the whole farm. I mean, I've seen farmers go, I'm just going to mob everything up. And it's been disastrous. And the analogy I like to use is, you know, I grew up in Huiroa. I went to a school with 18 kids. When I went to London, it was quite tricky for me because I didn't understand that there was trains below ground and above ground. I mean, it was a bit of a mind. So, you know, don't turn your farm into... Don't go from being Huiroa to being Tokyo in one day with your sheep. They too need to learn how to adapt to the circumstances. I mean, Kurt just shared what he did, and it worked really well. It doesn't always. So just be mindful of that and monitor things as you go. Look, we could all talk forever. I think what's really important is you guys get to ask the questions you want to ask. So what questions have you got out there?
Question. What density kilos did you find the stock struggled with as you increased your density for the length? Did you, like 20, 30,000 kilos a hectare type thing, or did you find any pattern?
To be honest, I've never actually measured any weights or in terms of that density in kilos per hectare. What I always go off is my observation of what's left behind. That's probably be one of my key observations, and as farmers, and I feel like this is a skill that we all need to get back to is that observation of what is actually happening, what you're seeing, because that'll tell you more than anything.
And I think the other thing there is, what's your objective? You know, I've deferred pastures before and put, 600,000 kgs of animals on a bit of land and got incredible results. But they've been there at night time, and during the daytime they've been on some really good quality pastures. So you're transferring nutrients. What is it you're ultimately trying to do? Are you trying to improve the soil or the functionality of that paddock? Are you trying to fatten some animals? Are you, what's the age group? What's the production goal? That's where all the variables come in. And that's where I think we as human beings find it tricky, because we've been used to a recipe. I'm on a 15-day rotation. Great. Don't have to think about it. Sorry, now you have to think about it. So, that's where it does get a little bit tricky and a little bit more complex.
But Kurt had he saw observation of his size of ewes and lambs for 3 days in the paddock, but his paddocks were bigger. I'm trying to work out how do I interpret that into a 4-hectare paddock.
Did you get that?
That's where I was going. But
Yeah, you're trying to interpret what sort of stocking rate.
I find 30,000 kilos for a 24-hour period for ewes and lambs. They do very well. That's 100,000 kilos if they just use it alone. So, and I'm finding that when I've got to the numbers point, I can improve my timing. And my timing improves the paddock. And I was just taking these observations and trying to turn these words into numbers that I can manage.
Great. Don't you love a numbers guy? That's not me.
You've got to delegate.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to delegate. You don't live forever. When you give these guidelines, they're not recipes. I agree.
Yeah, but it's teaching people the observational skills so that they can make those. Yeah. And if you can add numbers to that, and create a formula that works in that time zone, in that timeline, but it won't. If you pass it on to your neighbour, it may not be applicable. Is all we're saying.
Numbers after the observation is
Yeah.
not numbers before the observation.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I haven't dived in it as deep as that. As you're talking, I was just thinking, about having, say when you got 4 staff and shepherds and stuff, like, it definitely gets like you definitely need a bit of your plan of this is how many in this area for this time. But then, you need to be flexible. But it's when you got staff involved, it gets really tricky. And the more simpler you can have your farming system to, so everyone's enjoying it versus stressing every day. I don't know. I've got on tangent there.
Yeah. Looks like I'm the runner.
Hi, you guys seem to be talking about pastures that are pretty perfect because you're running cattle and so forth. I've just bought a farm that's quite neglected. I've got a problem with invasive species. Some of the problems are through water flow coming off the hill, which we're mitigating with new drainage and planting and slowing the water down. But some of the species I've got, I really don't know how to deal with them. I've got golden nut sedge, which is apparently lives in the soil for 30, 40 years with its seeds dormant. I don't know whether or not to set it on fire. I don't know whether or not to spray whole paddocks out, rip it up and replant with new species. I can't afford to put the animals that I need to push it and create a competitive environment. I've got Bathurst burr, I've got inkweeds, swamp weeds, willow weeds, carrot weeds, docks, thistles, kikuia, but I also have masses of great grass production land. But I want to get that back to being meaningful, but obviously I can't do the whole block because it'll just bankrupt me. So am I better getting a really great farm manager on, or someone who's going to lease it and put animal pressure on it, or just bite it off in chunks? How do I deal with those really invasive species that don't make my pasture conducive to the animals that I want to stock?
Like what comes up for me there is like a lot of those invasive species, they're there for a reason. Like something's triggered them to to pop up. So there's an imbalance in there somewhere. So it's just getting curious, asking some questions like, why are they there? What are they doing? What is the purpose of that plant? But then also looking for opportunities. Like there could be someone out there, a neighbour or someone else down the road that's maybe a bit overstocked or got a mob of cows that you could look at grazing for a certain amount of time. Or so there's just thinking about how we look at these things and always looking for opportunities is, I suppose, is how I would approach it. Is probably looking at it like that. And then just talking with people about it. That's a real big one. So
I think I'd add to that, understand that nature is always trying to put itself right. So every plant's there to do a job, which I've just repeated what he said in another way. And our job is then to do the diagnostics. So the minerals, the microbes, the management, the visual soil assessment. And if you don't, it's really good if you've got somebody who can come alongside you and help you, guide you through that process, because that's where we do our learning. And what we're ultimately out to do is to have our farmers be really people who really understand these systems deeply, so that they're not having to outsource themselves off the farm and all their knowledge. And it's a big learning curve. I've personally been on it, and these guys are on it, and there's a lot of other people in here that we're all doing it together. So yeah, reach out to others, but understand nature knows what she's doing. Try and understand her.
Yeah, and don't spend too much money, just use livestock. Grazing management, boom, cows, job done.
Other questions? Good question. Thank you.
Hiya. I've got a question. Are you adding fertiliser now that you've got your pastures all rotating? Either of you two. And now that you've left the lambs on the ewes, do you think you'll get to a point where you don't have to dock?
So to that first point, yes, we are still adding inputs. A lot of them are like fish base, humates, looking at biochars, but we're always looking at what we can, how that is working in our system. For me, less is more. Not going in and applying massive rates of lime or super, or not that we go down that pathway, but it's just with the organics. But it's just, yeah, for me, less is more. That's probably my biggest message there. And I'll leave Kurt to the sheep.
Just a little bit on fertiliser or inputs. I think, we used to spend 250 grand on fertiliser a year, but then our water system wasn't up to spec, and I think, like, my vision was to do day shifts, and I think if you can't do that, then my theory is that instead of spending money on the fertiliser is to actually maybe work out our system so we can get more day shifts of stock, so pasture can be rested longer. So I think there's more benefit and money spent on infrastructure to be able to have a system where you can have grass be rested as long as possible. So day shifts. That's my big take on any minerals added. Getting back to the sheep with the long tails, yeah, they'll be the go away, because if they're not wormy, they're not going to be as shitty, and then less dags, and then have long tails. It's just do your neighbours see you or not, sort of mentality, and maybe just a little. It's if you don't do it and then it doesn't go well. How do you? It's a big shift. Say if you got 4,000 ewes and you got a whole lot of long tails, yeah. But that is the ultimate, probably, is to have the tails on, but probably no wool around, just around the tail would be perfect.
Any other questions?
G'day, Kurt and Russ. Hey, how do you guys monitor soil moisture, and how does that affect your grazing management?
I used to monitor. No, I do, but I don't do it individually on the farm. I just do it through NIWA, and so I'll be watching NIWA, and then that'll determine of like how bad are we, how last year the soil moisture was about this. Yep, okay, we were okay on that rotation, and that was our policy. I think we'll be fine. And that definitely gives you confidence. Yeah, but that website NIWA is bloody good.
Like in terms of that, that's something we haven't really gone down in terms of monitoring that soil moisture. Definitely in terms of doing water infiltration tests, and that's something that's probably been one of the biggest improvements on the land since we've been down this journey, is like going from that sort of almost 5 or 6 minutes for that first inch to infiltrate to now we're down to like 40 seconds. So it's just monitoring that sort of thing is probably one of the things that we do look at. And also digging holes, just observations. Always digging holes, seeing what's going on, seeing where that moisture's been held in that profile, and especially when it is drying out. And then digging holes in our deferred paddocks and seeing that moisture right to the top of that profile. Understanding what is happening when you are taking those paddocks out and deferring them, or even running them on that delayed system is it's amazing how much moisture is staying right up to the top of that soil profile.
Yeah.
I've got a question back here.
Yeah, awesome, guys. So done plenty of deferred and sort of rolling deferred, but in terms of that 150 to 200 days you were talking about, well, both of you, how do you find the outcomes with that? So basically taking it through from maybe surplus end of October right through to May, June, or wintering. Yeah, how the outcomes with that system? How'd that work?
So with our dairy system, typically those paddocks we're taking out from around Christmas time onwards, and then we are leaving them right through into May, and then we start drying off in those paddocks, and then through into early winter. And what we've found there is we've found really high NDF, low nitrogen, low potassium, and lots of fibre, which is at that time of the year, that's exactly what we're after. So it's saving us from having to go and harvest hay, put it in the shed, and feed it back out again. But we're having all those added benefits of what that deferred grazing has done to our soil structure, and also for the plants, like the reseeding. And this is a really interesting point in terms of the seeding and what we see in our pastures. Is like, I've got my great grandfather's diary from 27, 28, and the seed mix that he was using back then is the seed mix that we are now using now. And so, and that was a real light bulb moment for me, because what I realised, there's certain paddocks on our farm that we can't get over and get a tractor over and reseed. But what's happened over time through grazing management is all those plants have come back. So the plants are there. So if you give them the right signals and you start changing up how you graze dictates what grows the most, or what comes through. And that's been a real big lesson for me, is with that grazing management.
I think one thing to add to that too is that once we get the biological system functioning in the soil, the palatability of your forages increases dramatically. And I think that one's often a game changer.
Yeah, I've found with the deferred grazing, like, you think it's ruined in that summer period. You're like, oh man, it's we're going to have mouldy grass, or it's going to be too dry. But then it just kicks into gear again in that autumn, and it's actually it's pretty green by the time you come to winter to graze it off. And then trying to have different pastures in this. pastures in the sward that can hold more dry matter, so phalaris, cocksfoot, and prairie grass. The best probably been phalaris. Tall plant, big leaves, can stay massively green. It can get this high. Cocksfoot's probably that high, and then ryegrass is probably half of that. So if you want to carry as much dry matter as you can through into the winter, phalaris is a pretty cool plant. But yeah, it definitely greens back up, and then those species that you're trying, your grazing management sort of determines what sort of species are going to come, and they'll end up coming through the system naturally.
Just about deferred grazing. In some paddocks we have tried to defer in the past. I think we probably done the worst paddocks to try and improve them. Do you think that's a good idea, and has it worked for you? But those paddocks, like the soil, they're not good paddocks because of the soil. And then, like, if you defer them, when you open up and get down to the bottom, it's stinky. The stock don't like it. Like it's yellow. The bottom half's like a yellow. It's gone, past it, and the sheep. Like you think, if you defer a paddock, you're going to have all this feed stocked up. But in our experience, it hasn't happened because the paddocks have gone. Well, they're not good paddocks. The pasture's crap. The animals don't like it. You get a day, a couple of days out of a big mob of ewes, and the whole point of the deferred is to kind of save pasture up. And in our few experiences, it hasn't really worked that way. And like, will those paddocks get better the more you do it? Have you found that?
When I've gone back to graze, it's all been cattle, so I can't really comment too much on the sheep, because they will. I can imagine that you'll have to push them a bit to get it to that clean state again. So I did a lot of on the cattle side. A lot of the time I found it wasn't probably the worst paddock. It was just like the paddock that sort of suited the rotation as we're going around to like skip, because that paddock had got out of control, which you can manage, what ones you do want to do. But and then we'd defer all our more stonier country, for when we had cattle, dairy cows, grazing. So I can't comment too much on the sheep, but there's something that Andy Bunny is actually going to be trialling this year is deferring a paddock and actually lambing at a high rate on deferred feed. So say instead of set stocked on at say 10 to the hectare, say set stock at 40 to the hectare, but on deferred stuff, lamb in there, and then save the rest of the paddocks up so then they can start moving. But it'll be interesting to see what that paddock looks like after it's been, does it need to be hammered with cattle afterwards? But hopefully.
I just want to add, I think you nailed it there, Kurt. I think trying to do a really long rotation with deferred pastures that are not great and don't have any bottom in them with sheep is just really, it's too big a ask for that group of animals. And that's where, it's sort of like the right animal in the right place. And yeah, there's times when we can use sheep and times when we can use cattle, but it does get tricky, and you've got to read it and maybe just come in a little bit earlier, not leave it quite so long, because what we're looking, you've got to have a balance of some vegetative plant material to go with that fibre, and then what's the class of livestock? If it's a dry ewe, it's a different game, or if it's a big old beef cow. So not an easy one, and hard when you've got land that's not productive, like you're talking about, Julie. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes left. Yep. If you wait, I'll give you a microphone, then everyone can hear you.
When you changed to adaptive grazing, how did you find, or what percentage of the animals didn't adapt, and what did you do with them?
To be honest, we actually haven't noticed any of our animals fall off by changing our grazing management. They've all adapted really well. we made the shift to once a day milking 10 years ago. And even someone said you're going to struggle with that, with your cows adapting, but it's amazing how adaptable an animal can be. Yeah.
Yeah, no real difference. It's, the sheep and the cattle are still going on to the best feed. It's not long and rank where we go to graze it. It's all mint feed. What we're trying to do is just, when it gets out of control, when the feed grows too much, it's like, let's just shut those paddocks up. So when we do come, we skip that paddock, we go into the next one. That's the next freshest, greenest, perfect, pasture to graze. Another thing, the big thing we're working on at the moment is grazing the plant. It's like, when do you graze a plant? And spend a lot of time with Jim Alessandro, and he's big on when the plant has started curving over. Because they talk about it a lot. Russ might be different or whatever, but they sort of talk about when the plant is sharp or whatever it is, but it's sharp at like 20 days. So when's it actually full of nutrients? And I think that whole curved leaf is actually kind of a cool concept to know when it's the right time to graze or look for.
Any other questions out here? I notice we've got Rachel and Kenneth and Mark. Are there anything that we haven't touched on that you guys go, hey, they haven't shared? Anything you want to add? Going once, going twice. We have a comment.
I'll make an observation. I'm currently under some pressure from friends about a paddock which they want me to they're saying, oh, come on now, put a mob of ewes in there and nail that tag. And it comes back to exactly how you manage your rotations, how you renew your pasture. And for me, a lot of it comes back to fencing. And my fencing's not good enough for me to actually set a mob of ewes in there for any great period. They're going to leave. So that's a job for me. But what I'll be doing, going back home from here, is I will actually go to that particular paddock. I don't have the luxury of hiding anything I do on our 90 hectares, where we're surrounded by 3 roads. People can see everything we're doing. But I'll go to that paddock and I'll actually have a look and try and work out what my friends and neighbours are actually seeing. And then I'll make some decisions. And it does come down to the individual. It's really easy to be influenced from the outside, but I guess we do have to grow up and make our own decisions. But I'll be going there. I'll be having a look to see what's in the sward, what tag there is, and I think it's the best we can do. Really, we do have to make our own choices, own decisions. I'm looking at Kurt and thinking, well, yeah, Kurt's probably thinking, yeah, you need to actually nail that paddock as well. And clean it up. Maybe. Tag is, long, rank, yeah. So I've got, because it's been a really kind season for North Canterbury, I've got lush green grass, but I've also got this older pasture growing through and just sitting there. So yeah, no, thank you everybody for that, for what you've done.
I just want to jump in there and say one of the golden rules is manage for what you do want. Stop putting your attention on what you don't want. Because you know what? When you put your attention on what you don't want, you get a whole lot more of it. So just cut it out.
Something else I just want to add in there too is like one thing we've achieved on our farm is like investing in our in our water, putting more water points around our paddocks, so we can increase our densities, and we can shift our nutrients. And one of my big key takeaways from the adaptive grazing is like eat and excrete in the same zone. And we do that by increasing our water points, putting up a fence, fences are never in the same place except for the permanence, and just little things like that and the difference that can make. And when I go and move my cows, is I go and hang out with them. And if I feel like there's a corner of the paddock where they don't normally hang out, I'll take them over there and they'll follow me, and I'll have 5-10 minutes with them, having some scratches, having some cow hugs, and they've all got up, they've all had a stretch, they've all had a crap, they've all had a wee, and it's just, and what I'm seeing now is around our paddocks is that evenness, that fertility spread evenly around our paddocks. So yeah, a big thing, slow down, observe what's happening, and you'll speed up.
And that's the bell. Thank you all very, very, very much.